Let's take a look at how we interact with objects on our canvas. For starters, you can click on an object to select it. This puts a bounding box around the object, no matter what its shape is. It'll always be a box. Could be a square, could be a rectangle, depends on the shape of the object. But that bounding box is designed to allow you to move or scale the object. To move an object, you drag from within the bounding box. To scale an object, you grab the corners. These are called handles. As we drag a handle, it allows us to scale the shape freely. And in this case, it allows me to distort my circle. If you hold the Shift key when you drag a handle, it constrains the proportions. And the Shift key is often used to constrain certain aspects of an action. For instance, the Shift key can also be held when you're moving a shape, and it will constrain the movement to be a straight line. If I drag up, down, left, or right, it's a perfectly straight up, down, left, or right. When I'm near the middle, it's a little tricky because it's allowing me to go up, down, left, or right because it doesn't know which way I intend to go. But if you're dragging a long distance, and especially when you're dragging a long distance, holding Shift can really help you stay straight. Another thing you can do using the handles is by holding the Command key, the handles become rotating tools. And as you drag, it allows you to rotate freely. Holding Shift will again be a constrain. It'll constrain into these little notches that help you stay straight at a perfect angle, at a perfect 45 degrees, at a perfect 90 degrees. It's really, really handy, so don't forget about that Shift trick. Shift comes in handy a lot of the time. Another key that comes in handy a lot is the Option key. When scaling, Option will scale outward from the center. If an object is already centered, the Option key is a great way to make a shape larger without having to go and move it again. For instance, if this were perfectly centered above the triangle, and I wanted to make it wider, this would be a silly way to do it, because now I have to move it. Whether I'm making it bigger or smaller, it's going to end up in the wrong position, whereas if I hold Option, it'll remain perfectly centered the whole time. Another thing the Option key can do is if you hold Option and move a shape, it gives you another one. It's the equivalent of copy, paste, and putting something where it belongs all at the same time. Now going back to selecting shapes, at the beginning we talked about clicking on a shape to select it, and only it. If we hold the Shift key, we can click on several shapes to highlight them all at once. And this goes for all types of layers, not just shapes. It works on text, it works on bitmaps, and it works on shapes. I'm going to delete these 4 shapes here, leaving us with just these 3 red rectangles. Now I can click and drag, and I get my alignment guides, and I'm able to line these things up. I'm able to eyeball it, and I'm able to get it pretty much perfect. I even get alignment guides in between to show me that my spacing is consistent. You can see that there are 68 pixels in between. When things are in more disarray, and you'd like for the computer to help you automatically align and distribute objects, you can even click and drag to select several objects. And with those objects selected, at the top of the inspector, I have alignment and distribute options. The first is to distribute horizontally. Now these objects are perfectly distributed, and the spacing between them matches. Next, I can vertically align them, either based on the top, the center, or the bottom. In this case, because they're all the same size, it's going to give me the same result. If I left align them, because they're all aligned vertically, aligning them horizontally puts them exactly on top of one another. So usually you're aligning vertically or aligning horizontally, not typically both, unless you're trying to put 2 objects directly on top of one another. But when you do have objects directly on top of one another, clicking selects the layer on top. If you want to grab a layer that's behind a layer, you can hold the Option key, and holding the Option key allows you to select the layer that's in the back. Because these are all the same color, it's hard to tell, so let's take a look at our layers list. You can see that not the first rectangle, but the second rectangle is selected. If you have several objects on top of one another, you may want to go to the Layers panel to select the object you're looking for. Another option is to do a secondary click, which is a 2-finger click on a trackpad or a right click on a mouse. That gives you the option of picking a layer, and this will only show the layers beneath where your cursor clicked. For example, if I move one of these rectangles over to the right and I do the 2-finger click over here on the left, it only shows those 2 layers that are overlapping, because that's where my cursor was. The one on the right-hand side is ignored. This can be really useful when you have 10, 20, 30 layers on top of one another, or even just 3. Another selection tip when you have a ton of objects that are overlapping is while a click and a drag may allow you to lasso several shapes simply by including them, any part of them, in that lasso, doing so holding the Option key will only include shapes that are entirely contained within the lasso. You'll notice now it's only selecting the shape in the middle. It's not selecting the outer 2. If I don't hold Option, it selects all 3. If they touch the lasso, it's included. One more thing to keep in mind is if I do have 3 shapes selected and I only want the outer 2, it doesn't hurt to select all 3 and then hold Shift and click the one in the middle to deselect it. You're able to select or deselect with the Shift key, so sometimes if you need 9 out of 10 objects selected, You're better off selecting all 10 and then removing that one that you don't want selected.